is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Unspoiled, guesting on Overdue, covering James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl. In this final episode of Unspoiled Book Club, me, Craig, and Andrew talk about this baffling book and how sad I am to be a grown-up. Welcome to Unspoiled.
Hey everybody, welcome to Overdue. It's a podcast about the books you've been meaning to read. My name is Craig.
My name's Andrew.
And we have a special guest who's here with us today.
Hi, I'm Natasha.
Hey
I'm
Natasha,
from,
how's it going?
Unspoiled. What's up, everybody?
Not much. We've got really great Thursday energy on this pod. I'm not sure what it is. Andrew
It's
and I...
I'm drinking caffeine.
Oh, that's good.
That sounds good.
Andrew and I are
Like,
still...
I really like how every time we have a guest on, you throw the intro to them like a half deflated basketball. Just like expect them to catch it and run with it.
I have learned it's not like I try to do it such with a rhythm. Okay, we're going to be talking about James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl in a second. And for the rest of the show thereafter. But I've tried to toss it to folks, and Natasha, you tell me how I did. I don't want it to be like people have to jump in on the same name train that we're on if we haven't told them to, right? I want to give them an invitation. How was the invitation?
I have no idea how to quantify this. I'm going to say it was good.
Okay.
Like a 10-point scale, let's say.
It was a solid 7.
7.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There wasn't so much of a gap that I started to be like, but it was a little bit of a moment of me opening my mouth to start to say my name. So,
Yeah.
Fans of the genre would appreciate that introduction. So every week on our show, we read a book and then talk about it. We're in the throes of November, which means we're going to talk about a book that at least some of us have read before. And that sort of fits what you're up to on Unspoiled as well, Natasha. So who has read this book already before you had to read it for this week's show?
I had read it as a kid.
I had also read it. And what I would have done was had a co-host who had not read it before if I was going to do a regular Unspoiled show.
Well, I'm happy to be that co-host today because I had not read this. I had not read this as a kid.
You never read about this boy and his big fruit?
I
Just don't.
I feel like I saw clips of the movie. I'm sure I've never seen the play.
That movie is wild, by the way. The 96 stop motion one, which I think you'd be forgiven if you thought that Tim Burton was involved, but no, I think it's just kind of a Burton-esque effort that drafts off of Nightmare Before Christmas a little bit.
I think some of the same stop motion folks were involved, even though he was not. Yeah, for sure. So was this like a beloved classic for either of y'all?
Yeah. I'd say so.
This book specifically wasn't. I loved Roald Dahl growing up in general. But like once I reread this, I realized what I liked about him, which is the fact that he is freaking bonkers.
Yeah.
Like this book just goes so far with just completely not caring about anything in the world and doing whatever it feels like. And I really miss like enjoying whimsy because the whole time I was reading it, I was like, this doesn't make sense. This isn't right. And then I'm just like, oh God, I am so boring. I suck so much. Being an adult is the worst.
And I need everything to make sense.
Making a giant peach fly with seagulls wouldn't work like this. No way.
I would
got to bring a very Neil deGrasse Tyson energy to to the book.
Oh God, Andrew, that is like the most insulting thing that's ever been said to me. Though not inaccurate. I'm not like, you're totally on point with it, but I'm going to have to say that to myself to kind of calm my bits down when I start to get a little bit too pedantic.
We can talk about it, because one of the interesting things about the book that I'd kind of forgotten is the way that it combines totally fantastical things with like totally mundane like facts about bugs.
Yes.
So it is kind of inviting the scrutiny just a little tiny bit by giving kids real facts, but then also making rainbows be made out of paint that you can break into shards.
This book is way nuttier than I thought it would be. Should we talk about Roald Dahl first?
Sure.
Just a little bit to set the stage. I don't know how much. Okay, I have stuff, and I'll just go.
I just know I read a ton of his books when I was a kid. Like the big ones were James and the Giant Peach, Matilda, and then the two Charlie and the Chocolate Factory books.
Charlie's and the Chocolate Factory, yes.
Yeah, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is the one, and then Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, which is not as good of a book, but has some of that weird flavor in it.
Sure.
It's, if you come expecting Roald Dahl, you'll be satisfied, I think. But
have either of you read any of his adult stories?
I have not. No.
They're the horniest stories you've ever read. Like, this man was just very interested in sex as a plot device, and it is at times it's very straight. Like, there's a couple of stories where there's also an element of like body horror tied in with it.
Yes, and, I can see that.
Yeah,
okay,
it's a little bananas. Like, as far as I haven't read them recently, but I enjoyed reading them at the time, and I really wonder now, looking back, because one of them in particular is about men who wife swap. Whoa, and they don't tell their wives, which is an awesome premise.
How does that work?
They each like wear each other's cologne and wear each other's clothing and stuff, and like slip out of bed in the middle of the night and then into each other's beds. And one of these guys has been lusting after the other dude's wife for ages and is very excited to do this. And then when he goes back to his bed in the morning, he gets up and he's talking to his wife, asking, just out of curiosity, like, so did you have a good time last night, knowing that she slept with a neighbor? And she tells him that she feels like for the first time she understands why people enjoy sex, and that she never had an orgasm before, and suddenly he seemed to understand her body, and he's like sitting there like his face draining of color and realizing that and he looks out the window and the neighbor's mowing his lawn and gives him like this big smug wink, and that's the end of the story.
Yes.
Oh boy.
Whoa.
Boy.
So yeah, he really goes for it, is what I'm saying. And I think everybody should just check it out to really see the foil against a peach that bugs live in.
Maybe this explains why when I went to RoaldDahl.com, there was a pop-up that said, "Greetings to you and how do you do? So that you have the very best time, we must firstly ask if you are a teacher, kid, or grown-up." And then you could click on each button, and it took you to different parts of his catalog. Nice. But it's mostly focused on the children, but that's what I clicked on.
Roald Dahl's website has like a curtain for the adult section that you can only go back into curtain if you're old enough. Yeah.
Mr. Dahl was born in 1916 in Wales to some Norwegian parents. He was named after the first dude to reach the South Pole, which I think is cool.
Oh.
His birthday, I think, is September 13th, which is Roald Dahl Day. You can find out more tidbits about that by just Googling Roald Dahl Day if you need to do anything on that day. He did die in 1990 at the age of 74. He did experience loss at a pretty young age. Like, his older sister and his dad died when he was a kid. He was sent away to the Repton boarding school, which he hated because there was lots of hazing and stuff like that. And that informs some of his books where kids are being mistreated, or I think the witches and stuff, like various settings where a boy is having a tough time in society. Apparently, the Cadbury chocolate people would come to this school and test chocolate on the boys. what do you think of this chocolate?
When you say it like that, it sounds so sinister. But like,
Yeah.
when I think about it, I'm like, that's rad. Wow.
And he apparently like used to dream up like, what if I could make a candy bar that Mr. Cadbury would like? And you know, he drew on that for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Oh, that's so awesome.
And it's kind of interesting how he does like a Kevin Smith-esque fictional universe.
Yes, he does.
Because in this book, which is published in 1961, he mentions both a chocolate factory and these things called vermicious canids.
Vermicious canids.
Which show up later in the 1973 Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator as like aliens that spell out the word scram to tell people to go away. So yeah, he would come up with these weird fanciful names for things, and then he would insert them into other books to like give them a sort of through line.
Sure.
But yeah, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was in 1964. Matilda was in 1988. It was pretty late.
Yeah, in between that, you get Fantastic Mr. Fox and the BFG and the witches and stuff like that. Yeah.
Oh, I liked Fantastic Mr. Fox also.
Yeah, I just saw that actually. So he's
George
like,
Clooney?
yeah, it did.
He's in that movie?
So weird. Yeah, the whole cast. I was just like,
Hot
what?
Fox?
But with the like through line, like I'm realizing that he's sort of like a children's Stephen King. Like
He is. That's a good way to think about it.
Because there are frequently these like grotesque characters, but also, yeah, there's a very like Derry, Maine underlying
and
like shared fictional fabric that all the books have in common.
He's one of the best-selling children's authors, and he never wrote like a series. Like he never wrote a long-running. Like even Stephen King has like the Dark Tower books, right? Like it's not Narnia. It's not any of the other like, oh, I'm a big children's author and I have all like I have all the Harry Potter books or whatever like that. He's closer to like almost Dr. Seuss in a way, where it's like, here's just a bunch of cool books I wrote that kids love.
Yeah, he had planned apparently a third Charlie book, but it just never ended up happening.
He was
called Charlie in the White House.
Great, perfect.
What?
Sure.
Is this a little fun bit? Or is
No,
that
this
true?
is real. It's real. Charlie in the White House.
All right.
just
I'm
never
not sorry
happened.
that didn't happen anymore. It's fine.
Yeah.
That's best for the best.
He was a sick World War II fighter pilot, and then when his plane crashed and he couldn't be a pilot anymore, he was an intelligence officer in the U.S., which is kind of neat. He worked against America First stuff in the U.S., which is kind of cool, which he then later in some interviews in the 80s made some anti-Semitic comments, which maybe balances the scales back against him. Who knows what you're going to do. Not everybody's perfect. Roald Dahl is certainly not. He did invent a valve to help you drain fluid from your brain, or he helped to invent it, because, like, you know, your kid has a brain injury and then you want to help him, and then you find some dudes to make a valve to get the fluid out of his brain. I'm Roald Dahl.
What were his qualifications?
He didn't invent it. Okay, he did not invent it. He knew a man who was a hydraulics engineer, and he knew a neuroscientist, and he played matchmaker and is on the patent, and none of them took any money for it because it's for kids and brains and kid brains.
So he was very formative to child minds for
in more ways than
different
one.
ways.
Oh no!
Yeah. You just put cool characters and fictional scenarios into their brains, and then you drain all the fluid out to make more room.
Sure.
For more books.
Sure. What we should probably
you guys
get
are really
into
on a roll with phrasing things tonight and making it all seem really scary, and it's just kind of
We're still
alarming.
recording this in October, and so it's got kind of Spooktober fumes.
Yes, that's true.
Wafting off of it.
We should probably get into the book, because there's like other stuff about his legacy and like what types of writing he's remembered for and what people do and don't like about his writing that I think will come up as we talk about the story itself, which it sounds like we all had a fun time reading, and I certainly don't come here to like dunk on James and the Giant Peach. I don't come here to bury James, but to praise him. Thank you both. Who wants to start by telling us about the super cool thing that happens to James at the beginning of this book?
I really want Andrew to do it.
James Henry Trotter is his name.
Yes, yes.
He is a happy boy, but then his parents are eaten by a rhinoceros. And he has to go live with his mean aunts.
Like,
that's the setup.
I don't think that angry rhinoceri eat people.
You'd be wrong about that, my friend. Because it happened to James Henry Trotter's parents.
It's true.
And that's science.
And that is science.
That was the moment when I was rereading this that I realized that I was in for more than I remembered.
Yeah.
When his parents get eaten by a rhinoceros, I was like, word?
There are so many things. There are so many things in this book that I did not remember.
It felt like Shel Silverstein owes a big debt of gratitude to Roald Dahl. Immediately, I was like, oh, that's the type of world I'm in. It's like,
that makes sense, actually. I like that connection.
So he's sent to live with his crappy aunts, Spiker and Sponge, which are just Ninja Turtle villains, I think.
I am sorry to say that they were both really horrible people. They were selfish and lazy and cruel, and right from the beginning, they started beating poor James for almost no reason at all. So this is a common thread in Dahl's work. It's not the case in Charlie Bucket's family, but it's definitely a thing here and in Matilda is horrible, mean caretaker figures who the child must escape using some kind of fantastical means.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just bad people. There's no equivocating. There's no attempt to understand them. They're just awful to him in a classical kidlit sense.
It's really amazing. Like, we talked about the movie being really something earlier, and it is such a something that all these years later, I have not rewatched it, and yet reading this, those claymation figures were in my mind every scene that these two were in. And Aunt Spiker in particular is really alarming looking. Has almost pointed teeth at times, depending on like what mood she's in. Mm-hmm. And the various scenes of them calling him, "You disgusting little beast, you disgusting creature," and they call him "it" a lot.
Yes.
Just set it outside and don't let it get anything on the curtains. Like this kind of attitude. I really loved it, to be honest, because listen, I don't intend to have any children. Mm-hmm. And in my heart of hearts, if I were to have a child, I have a hard time thinking that I would not react this way to the child being near my very nice curtains with his face and hands covered in chocolate or whatever. I would just like, there are elements to these terrible, horrible aunts that I relate to.
I mean, listen, I have a 3-month-old baby and I love him so much, but he didn't poop for 2 days. And then when he finally did, it was I think that the EPA has declared my house a super fun site. Like it was a bad scene.
Yeah. Got a champion pooper on your hands, huh?
It was bad. It was bad.
I'm going to a baby shower this Saturday, actually, and we were out buying stuff. And I had a moment of just being like, am I sure I don't want to have kids? And I'd pretended that I was pregnant mentally for a second just to be like, how would I feel about it? And the overwhelming panic that just filled me, that just was like it was almost like heart stopping. This just, oh my God. I was like, nope, I'm good. So yeah, these two aunts didn't ask for this little brat to be dumped in their lap. They didn't have, their stupid relatives went and got ate by a rhinoceros. Like, who does that?
That's true. It does.
I like to imagine them on Twitter, like really obnoxiously complaining about people's kids on planes and like calling everybody breeders and all that fun, like child-free thing that people do.
It is a good example of a thing that from what I understand, a lot of Dahl fiction does do, I think, as I recall, and is certainly a fixture of Kids Lit, where like we can also tell that they are bad people by like how Dahl describes them. He does do that thing where like moral qualities are directly impacted by how like extreme you are in your appearance. Mm-hmm. So like Aunt Spudge was enormously fat and very short. She had small piggy eyes, a sunken mouth, and one of those white flabby faces that looked exactly as though it had been boiled. She was like a great white soggy overboiled cabbage. Aunt Spiker, on the other hand, was lean and tall and bony, and she wore steel-rimmed spectacles that fixed onto the end of her nose with a clip. She had a screeching voice and long, wet, narrow lips, and whenever she got angry or excited, little flecks of spit would come shooting out of her mouth as she talked. So even, like, as I read it back, it feels even more descriptive than I remember. But it does.
It has giant bugs in it, and they are described more favorably than these two ants.
Yeah. And, you know, I was reading a little bit about folks, like, having issues with this type of children's literature, and there's, like, whatever. Like, stuff is messy, and kids love gross stuff, and kids love reading about characters that are, like, memorable and distinct and have things like that. And so you can talk about, if you're reading this with a kid, you can talk about whether or not that's a fair appraisal of someone, I suppose. Because, like, I wouldn't want a kid coming out of the book that I read being like, well, anybody who looks like that is as nasty as Aunt Sponge. Let's just talk about how nasty Aunt Sponge is.
Right. Yeah, and it's tough because I think across all of, especially like kid lit, but really a lot of other lit as well. Like we talked about Dickens a few weeks ago.
Oh,
this
yeah.
was a thing with him too.
For sure.
But there is, and I guess also in society, there's so much equating of like fat and being overweight, especially with some kind of moral shortcoming or moral failure, that it's hard to, it is hard for me sometimes to just look at one book doing it and be like, oh, it's just one book, it's descriptive, whatever.
Sure.
Like it's a cumulative thing, and it's hard to avoid. And I don't know, like Henry doesn't like read yet, so I still got time, but I'm not sure how to bring that up, I guess, or like counteract it, because it's hard to find examples that cut the other way. I don't know.
Yeah, that's one of those things that, like, I mean, even going back and reading the first Harry Potter book, the descriptions of Dudley and Uncle Vernon are really horrifying. And it would be one thing if it was like, well, she really like leaned into that on the first book because she was clearly writing something more children, like for more imaginative younger children. And then you go into like the third and fourth book. It's still really a thing, especially with Dudley. Especially considering that, like, really there aren't any other fat characters in that book at all that I can remember. There's just Hagrid being big overall. But, you know, so yeah, it's, as somebody who is fat, I am a lot more conscious now of how frequently this sort of thing comes up and how much I just took for granted that was like a perfectly fine shorthand as a kid. And like looking back, I'm just like, ooh, the damage, you know? And like Andrew's saying, just trying to find an example cutting the other way is close to impossible.
Yeah.
And when you're just like bombarded with that, how does one not internalize that? Like it's gotta be super tricky. So yeah, it's a thing that is going on. It's over mostly by the time the ants exit the picture, which we will talk about because it's one of the many just utterly macabre, horrible things that happens in the book.
And it's hard to,
it's
hard to put in a vacuum too, because he is deploying the same skills that make the rest of the whimsy really, really work. It's not like it's not poorly crafted. It's just, you know, societally harmful. To be blunt.
Oh god, it's just, you know, gonna cause long-term damage on all of our psyches, but at least he did it well.
Well, yeah.
No, I
mean,
totally
if you're gonna be evil, do a good job. Like
if you're gonna be evil, do a good job. That's the new Google
by
motto.
The seat of your pants.
I've been saying, yep. Like,
so he meets a man.
I can respect a bad person, at least if they're somewhat intelligent, and
that's woof. That's okay. Yeah, I can't fault you there. I think I feel the same way. So James meets a creepy wizard grandpa. Who is this guy?
I don't know.
He's like wandering out in the woods to do something. I don't remember what he's doing. And he meets an old man who's got a bag of bugs or beans or rocks They're green and they move.
Wormy things. In the movie, they're sort of like glowing green worms, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Am I remembering that right?
Yeah. It's very like what does he keep calling them? The flecks, or so he calls them something that's like not really determining a creature that they like line up with. But I really remember like the look of these in the movie in particular was something that stuck with me because they glow and look so cool.
Mm-hmm. And they like move in the bag and stuff.
Yeah, they're jumping around. They're very sort of like manic, constantly trying to get out. And so when he drops the bag, it's an immediate like race to get as close to a living thing as they can right away.
They're referred to just as green things, like over and over again.
Okay.
That's the terminology. But so the old wizard grandpa tells James, go like eat these with some of your hair and you'll be happy.
You will never be miserable again. Yes.
I am dying to know what was going to happen if he did this.
Yeah. Does he just become a big peach?
Because that's just
somehow.
Doesn't it seem like all that happens is that things just become supersized?
Things get big, yeah.
Things get big.
That's what the movie Super Size Me is about. So he's running to go into the house to devour these green things and be happy forever when he trips and he dumps the bag all over the ground. And before he can save any of them, they all burrow into the ground and they're gone.
And it's like a giant, and then they're clearly going towards the peach tree and going in the ground around the peach tree, which is
old barren peach tree that's never grown any fruit and it's just hanging out.
Apparently inspired by a cherry tree outside of Roald Dahl's house, but he thought peaches would be better.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I could see that being... Peaches have a tougher skin, so I can imagine it standing up to the tumbling a little bit better.
Oh, sure.
If you're covered in cherry juice, it's a real carry situation.
Ooh,
you don't...
So
I don't think you could land this thing on the top of the Empire State Building and not horrify people with the way that you look.
Oh, God.
So the first thing that the ants do is resort to capitalism. This giant peach grows in the tree that has never borne a peach before. So it's as big as a house, and it only stops growing when it touches the ground. And I don't remember which ant is which when they're like, we could eat it and not be hungry. And the other one's like, nah, but money. Let's have some money. There's a great illustration in the Kindle edition that I got had illustrations from Quentin Blake in 1995. And there's this great picture of like all these people trying to see this peach, and there's like 5 helicopters above them. Like people are so pumped about this peach. I love it.
The edition I think, has the
original.
No, that is Quentin Blake.
Oh, is it Quentin Blake?
I was going to say the original. I think it's just the ones from the edition that I read as a kid, and so I thought they were the originals. But 95 would be about right.
I'm trying to figure out who illustrated mine because these illustrations are frankly like kind of horrifying. Like it sort of remind me of the style of like the scary stories.
Oh yes,
like the
Tell in the Dark.
That's sort of like drippy and very like freaky looking. Illustrated by Nancy Echolm Burkert.
I believe that those are the original ones.
She's the original illustrator, yeah.
Well, she freaky. Like the old man who's like trying to give him this bag has a head shaped like a perfect sphere.
Ooh.
And he looks like a straight up alien. So, yeah. All right, lady. I see you.
In our edition, he just looks like Richard Schiff from TV's The West Wing.
He does. That's good.
Oh God!
So they lock James in the house so that he can't peach, and he's all mad because he's like, "Yo, there's probably a bunch of kids trying to pay to see this peach. I could like actually meet a kid and get out of your hair." And they're like, "Nah, live in the house, live under." Do they put him under the stairs, Harry Potter style, or do they? I don't remember where they lock him up.
I know they make him sleep on boards, but I don't remember where he has to.
I think he's in the
room
attic.
He has to sleep in.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, but.
Why does he... So then he gets to the peach somehow, and I don't really remember how or why.
They tell him to clean up all the garbage that the people left when they came to look at the big peach.
Okay. And then he sees like a hole in the peach?
Right.
Yeah. And they also like didn't give him any dinner. So my mind thinks that maybe he was thinking that he might take a little bite.
A little nibble.
Yeah, just try and do it somewhere where they wouldn't notice it.
Sure. And he goes in there, and there's just a bunch of bugs in there.
There's a bunch of big bugs who all seem to know him.
They are so pumped. I highlighted immediately when the bugs are like, "We've been waiting for you," which is just the nicest thing to say to a kid who's had a crappy life. It's just, we're giant bugs and we've been waiting for you. I love these bugs so much.
It's almost
They're
like
cool bugs.
The little green things like had knowledge of James because they were given to him. And so when these things each got touched by one, they also like inherited like this sort of religion that James is their Messiah. Which I'm fine with.
I mean, he kind of lives up to it too. He does like help them out a bunch.
Yeah.
They do all kind of accept his authority over them pretty quickly.
It's very bizarre.
Once things start going south.
There is no king bug. There's no like boss bug of the bugs. Like, they're just like, oh, James is here. He's in charge.
Boss Bug. I like this. This sounds
sequel
like a
to Boss
supervillain.
Baby.
I need this.
And Andrew, tell me about these bugs. What bugs do we meet?
Well, we got a old grasshopper, got a ladybug, got a spidey, got a centipede, got an earthworm who's blind and complaining all the time.
Yep.
About being an earthworm. And then there is a glowworm who mostly serves as a light fixture.
Yep.
And a silkworm who makes silk. And I think that's everybody, right?
I think that's everybody.
Think so.
Yeah.
What was it like revisiting these bugs, Natasha?
It was extremely, again, I hate being a grown-up because damn did I relate to Earthworm. Like, I distinctly remember when Centipede was like my jam, when he was my boy, and he was out here just being like, oh, lighten up, it'll be fine. And like, as a kid, you're like, yeah, it's a book. Of course it's going to be fine. Shut up. And I just wanted to get on with the fun parts. And now I'm reading Earthworm, and he's like, we're all going to drown. They're going to eat us. We're going to starve to death. It'll be a long, painful death, and we'll suffer terribly. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably...
Yeah, you got it. The boy is quite right. The old green grasshopper said, we are floating beautifully. Now we must all sit down and keep perfectly calm. Everything will be all right in the end. What absolute nonsense, cried the earthworm. Nothing is ever all right in the end, and well, you know it. It's like, yes, I am an earthworm.
Yep.
Ladybug says of him, he loves to make everything into a disaster. He hates to be happy. He is only happy when he is gloomy.
Like, I really don't like it about myself. I'll be straightforward. You know, this is not something I'm proud of, but yeah, it feels
It's
right.
just the way, yeah.
Later on, Earthworm brags that he eats dirt all the time, and James is like, ew, that's gross. And then the Earthworm's like, yeah, every ounce of dirt that you've ever touched has been through an earthworm. And James is like, yo, that's gross.
Yeah.
My one big adult reaction to this was just the thought of them riding on this peach for days and days and just eating
the peach,
sticky, nasty old peach, and being all sticky and gross. All that, it'd be so sticky. They crawl through a tunnel of peach.
Yes, yeah, like so they chop the peach out of the tree. It goes rolling down the hill. They roll over the ants. I guess kill them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yes, they're dead.
Totally dead.
It is unambiguous.
Smash through that chocolate factory. Get chocolate everywhere. And then, I guess, go over the cliffs of Dover? Like, Roald Dahl says they're very famous English cliffs. I think those are the only ones that I know are the white cliffs of Dover.
I didn't even think of that, but yeah. Yep, that's got to be what it is.
And then they go just crashing into the sea. And they have to start flying because sharks want to eat the peach. Mm-hmm, and them, I guess. Mm-hmm. And then, I don't know if we had started recording, or maybe this was earlier in the episode, Andrew, when you were just like, yeah, I guess we catch a bunch of birds to start flying?
That was earlier in the episode.
Well, how does that work? They got to get out of the shark ocean.
The shark
they lasso a bunch of seagulls. with thread from the spider and the silkworm.
501 seagulls.
502 seagulls.
Oh, excuse me.
It starts to lift out of the water with the 501st seagull, and then the 502nd seagull is the one that gets him up. So, and then the peach is mostly fine because there's this big, long section about the way that shark heads are shaped, and they've got protruding noses that would keep them from finding purchase on a large spherical object like a peach.
Like, can we talk about the fact that he felt the need to justify this after he has a peach being carried by a bunch of seagulls? Like, why was this the thing that he was like, nobody's going to buy? The sharks did not eat this peach. I am really going to have to figure out a way to explain this one.
This guy, I think it does a thing that you were talking about earlier, Natasha, which is like it does some kid whimsy that is also mixed with like grounded stuff. Where the kid would want it to be able to be lifted by the birds, but then the kid that you're telling the story to would also ask you, why can't the sharks eat it? And so you got to come up with a reason. Like, it feels very in conversation with either the kid reading or the kid being read to, in a way that I was really impressed by and taken with. I don't know. It just feels like he has fun answers for why things can happen, and then also is like, yeah, okay, if that happened, it would go this way, and that's why that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. He's a clever dude. Though I do want to know, so, okay, Centipede sings lots of songs. It's very like The Hobbit up in here with the
He
with
would
the
totally
Centipede.
have a podcast.
Yeah, the Centipede would have too many podcasts. And he is like singing a bunch of songs. He sings one song about how much he loves all sorts of different foods, including hot dogs. How does Centipede know what hot dogs is? How does he know what hot dogs is? That's a good question.
Maybe he would like eat up the leftovers after people would come to the fair, which is the peach fair, where people would come to see this peach. Maybe there were some vendors that sold some hot dogs and
I think
the food truck market that sprang up around the peach.
Yeah,
Ed Spiker and Ed Sponge really were into just like supporting local businesses, and I think they don't like kids, but maybe they were really nice to everybody else.
Sure, okay.
They're really pillars of the community, and
Yes.
that just fell apart in their absence after they were killed by this big fruit.
tragic demise of these two
Community
entrepreneurs.
center closes. The Sponge and Spiker Memorial Library opens up.
They were gonna use the money to save the rec center, but the peach killed them both.
Sure. Also, Ladybug raises a thing about which bugs get to be people. I'm always fascinated. Okay, this has come up when we talk about books about animals, where like which animals get to have sentience or not.
Right.
And at a certain point, I think it's Ladybug who's talking about eating. They're all talking about like how farmers depend on the bugs. Mm-hmm. And Ladybug is like, yo, I eat all these like crappy green flies that are like going to ruin all the food.
Aphids.
And in my head, I'm just like, well, do they get to learn what hot dogs are and how great James is? Do they get to hear the word of James? Are they just getting eaten because they're like heathens and don't have a conscience? Dahl has not answered every question that one could ask about this book.
Definitely some elitism happening, because at one point the ladybird is like, well, some of us only have one spot on each side of our shell, and I hate to say it, but they're really calm. And it's just super like classist. Like, okay, lady, what is
that felt super British to me. Like a lot of this,
sure.
Not all of this book feels especially British. Like, I mean, a lot of it is a lot British, but I guess it didn't strike me as being especially foreign as a kid. But but yeah, that class thing in particular. Like, there's the 2 spotted ladybugs who you wouldn't want to associate with, and there are the 5 spotted ladybugs who are nice but a little saucy for her tastes, and then there are the high class 9 spotted ladybugs.
Well, and then like Grasshopper gives like a sweet concert when James is like in awe of him as a musician because he's an artiste, and he's like, oh yeah, there are the differently horned grasshoppers who are just wing rubbers, he calls them. They're not. You know, he uses his leg because he's an artiste, and these wing rubbers over here are just making like chugga chugga music, like, you know, EDM stuff. It's not real music.
I love the idea of using this like as an insult in conversation and not giving any context at all. So he's a real wing rubber, if you know what I mean. I don't know what you mean.
We can make it happen. We can make it happen.
So, okay, the last thing we talked about, they are on the Peach, they're flying through the sky, and then we got to the part of the book that no one warned me about. Where there are demons in the sky who make rain or hail. They are made of clouds.
They make all the weather. Yeah.
What the
Cloudmen.
F is this? What is this book?
Cloudmen.
It's not James and the
like
meteorological
that Andrew just keeps saying
disaster
Cloudmen
man.
louder and louder. Like
That's what they Cloudmen.
I was
They
prepared.
make the weather. The weather's got to come from somewhere, and it comes from the Cloudmen.
I was
What is your
prepared
problem?
for giant bugs. I was not prepared for evil cloud automatons.
they're not
They weren't
evil.
Evil. The bugs in the Peach come and wreck up their entire business.
Oh my God,
guess.
Andrew, we're so old. Look at us. Just like they were just trying to do their jobs and somebody came rolling in and ruined their day. They have to make their quota. It just killed me.
This is, yeah, I was honestly like, how much of this did you guys remember as being integral to the story? Because honestly, having never read it
zero.
before, no one
Did
told
not
me it was
remember
in
any of
here.
this.
I thought it was just cool bugs.
Not a thing. Not
I
a
remembered more of the like bug facts than I
Sure.
remembered of the Cloudmen, and the Cloudmen bit just goes on for a while.
For a while. Like, the Cloudmen try to get revenge. I think
Revenge of the
Centipede
Cloudmen.
Centipede is calling them, like, he's actually calling them, like, asses. Like, that is Roald Dahl's word, not mine. There's some language in this book. And they run, as you said earlier, Andrew, they run into a rainbow and, like, break it, which is how
Yeah,
rainbows
they break
work.
it.
Because
Yeah, it's
rainbows
like these
are just
are
paint.
dudes carrying a giant pane of glass across a street.
Yeah,
And they just like go flying through it. Again, I'm not mad at them for being mad at the bugs.
Sure.
Look. But
mistakes were made. Yes, but it's fine.
But yeah, I didn't remember any of this at all, and agreed about it just going on so much longer than I expected. Like I really thought that this was just going to be a little stop off in a series of like strange adventures of coming across different things.
Yes.
They're really like a solid third of the book in total.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And this peach goes through some stuff.
yes.
It gets
'cause they're like,
hailstones thrown at it and leaks all
Yup.
of its juice.
Ew.
There's like paint that gets dumped all over it.
yeah, there's a whole section where one of them is maybe Centipede, who's like encased in paint and can't move because he's got rainbow paint on him.
Yeah.
Like, what is this book? You're right. I'm with you, Natasha. My immediate reaction to them was like, oh, this is going to be us like a cool little vignette, and then we'll meet some new demons that Roald Dahl made up that explain some other phenomenon.
I really like the use of the word demon to describe them.
I don't
like
know.
that.
I don't know why that was my
Feels
reaction.
prescriptive. I don't know why you're so
Yeah.
down on the Cloudmen. They have families, Craig.
Do they?
The Cloudmen,
Yes,
they're just going through some economic anxiety right now.
Uh-oh.
And
Float through a city of Cloudmen, and their Cloud wives are, and this is very, 1961, but their Cloud wives are home preparing snowballs for their husbands to eat.
I love that it's only the dudes that make weather, and they're out here just like frying snowballs.
Yeah.
So, to be honest, sounds terrible.
We need to go to some diners in the Midwest where some Cloudmen are and really get to the bottom of this issue, I think, and really learn what they care about.
The real Cloudmen.
Some of these Cloud women gotta rise up and break the cumulonimbus ceiling, I think. Is what needs to happen.
It's sad. Okay.
Yep. That's fine.
So the peach is all messed up, and it's leaking its juice. And they had to cut some of the bird. Some of the birds get cut off?
All the birds get
the birds
the
get cut
plane
off.
comes and slices through all of the threads with its wing.
Okay.
So they had been they had been planning to do a nice slow descent by cutting a bird off here and there, and instead this plane just comes and just messes up their whole day.
I appreciate that all 500 of these birds, 502, have been flying in the same direction the whole time. Like, they all agree where to go, and no one's telling them what to do. So they're falling, and then there's something that how do they stop from just sinking into the ocean? What do they... I honestly can't remember.
At this point, they land on the Empire State Building, right?
Yeah, like they're flying over New York City, and there's that whole little passage where the entire country goes on high alert because they think it's the biggest bomb that has ever existed, and it's going to fall on New York City, and it's going to blow everybody up.
Yeah, that part was kind of real here in 2019. That they really think that there's going to be some sort of, Cold War attack or something. And then
it's very like Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yes, sure.
Actually.
And it gets speared on the Empire State Building, and a bunch of cops run to the roof, like ready to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And a bunch of bugs fall out, and they're freaking out. And then James raps at them about his bug friends.
I didn't think of it in those terms, but I hate it. Wow.
Where's the lie?
My name is James, and I'm here to say, gotta give my bud friends some jobs today. This is the thing that I'm talking about when I say that I never. This is the. Sorry, I just looked up and saw Craig like leaning back. When I was a kid, this is what I wanted, and I think you're right, Craig, when you were talking earlier about him asking, like, taking into account what kids are looking for in a story with being like, well,
sure,
they want them to survive these sharks, but they're going to need a reason. And I love that he's like, well, these kids aren't going to want the bugs to just suddenly become unenchanted and go back to normal size and for James to go on with his life. They want these bugs to be a thing that's like wild and strange out in the world. So we're going to keep this going. And I love that he did this. As an adult, it's extremely hard for me to like appreciate it the way that I know I did as a kid. Similarly, the two aunts getting flattened and killed. Yeah. As a kid, I definitely wanted those aunts dead. 100%.
Yeah, they were bad.
Yeah. Like just
ants.
No doubt at all. But as a grown up, I'm like, God damn, he just straight up killed those bitches. Like, it just seems kind of extreme. But as a kid, you want extremes. That's sort of like the whole thing, right? Being a kid
true.
is just like you're trying to get the maximum out of everything all the time.
Yeah, I just like that there's all this fantastical stuff that happens, and then once we get to New York City, Roald Dahl is like, well, I mean, these bugs, how are these bugs? They gotta have jobs, right? Like they have to have a means of support, or else this doesn't make any sense.
Well, yeah, it's kind of wild because it's like, on the one hand, it's doing a thing that is fun to do with kids, where it's like, okay, well, if this bug did have a job, what would its job be based on the things that that this bug can do? On the other hand, it's very like, well, these bugs need jobs. You're right, Andrew. It's like we have to put them to work, or else they're useless to us in America. So like the centipede works for a boot and shoe company because he's an expert on shoes with his 42 feet. The earthworm makes face creams. They put
I mean, okay. Everything makes sense except for this one, she said.
Really?
With total sincerity.
That's the one?
I think you'd spend this whole book talking about how good earthworms are at like farming and fertilizing stuff, and then you make this earthworm like a mud cream, right? A Mary Kay person. Like, what do you? I don't understand what you're doing.
He's making creams that like people sell on TV. Like
I understand what he's doing. I'm saying it's a dumb ending for him.
Fair. Okay.
Guys, picture an earthworm skin, and picture it blown up like 1,200 times its original size. Is that something that makes you want to buy that face cream?
I don't think they're using the bug to sell the cream.
It says that he has nice skin. It specifically said that that's why he was chosen for this, because of his lovely skin.
And he's not doing like animal testing. He's doing the advertising part of it. Let me find the exact part of the book. Craig, I'm really surprised that you're just being so cavalier with your facts here.
No. The earthworm, with his lovely pink skin.
With his lovely pink skin, was employed by a company that made women's face creams to speak commercials on television, which is a wild way to refer to that job.
Speak commercials.
But the earthworm is a spokesworm for the face cream.
Oh, I think I literally misunderstood what those words meant. Yep, you're right. Okay, this sucks.
A likely story.
No, I honestly thought that he was making the cream that went on people's faces.
He was making it?
He was making
it?
How was he making it?
Pooping it out?
Because it was like a... All right, I really messed this one up. I'll take the loss on this one. That one sucks. The other stuff doesn't suck as much. The silkworm and the spider work in a nylon factory. Cool nylons. It's the 60s. Great. The glowworm lives in the Statue of Liberty. That's a cool thing that would have made my trip to the Statue of Liberty as a kid cooler if there's a giant glowworm in there. The grasshoppers in the New York Orchestra. Sick. Rock and roll. The ladybug married a fireman.
The head of the fire department.
Listen, I don't even want to talk about the kinds of slash fic that would have spawned if this were published today. That is a Chuck Tingle book in the making.
Head of the fire department is nasty.
Pounded in the thorax by the head of the fire department.
Pounded in the thorax by the 9-spotted ladybug.
Oh, God.
Who marries a giant ladybug? What are we doing?
The head of the fire department.
Man.
Well, because
these East Coast liberals will deal with anything.
Yeah, seriously. What's next? It's a slippery slope. When James is rapping about all his cool bug friends, the audience is mostly like cops and first responders.
Yep.
Rooftop party for cops.
I loved this. This is one of the moments when I was reading it that I was like, okay, here comes the Englishness coming through that he doesn't realize is there. Because, for full disclosure, I jumped between reading the text of this and going to an audio book that I found for real cheap. And the audio book is curious because it's got a bunch of sound effects along with everything. So like when the peach is falling, there's like that whole thing. Nice. And he changes, he does an American accent for these characters. And they're saying things like, it's most peculiar, I can tell you that. And it's like, yeah, no, Americans would not. Like, it's all, the wording is just so British. So then you hear it said with an American accent and it's just jarring. And there's a lot of moments of that throughout this dialogue that it's just the way that certain things are phrased and wording that we don't use, that they use there instead. Sure. And I was just kind of tickled by that because it is such a subtle thing. And I can totally understand as a kid, not picking that up. As a writer, just being like, whatever. But reading it now, I am sort of fascinated at the subtle differences between American English and English.
Even though it was published in America first, it was actually a couple years later, I think, that James and the Giant Peach was published in the UK. I think some people did not care for the foul language that that caterpillar used or centipede used, because you do. Yep. And then James just lives in the pit of his giant peach in Central Park. Which is like, who is? So he's living in Central Park.
And
in
kids
the
pit of a big peach,
inside of a big peach, and kids can just come hang with him.
Yeah.
Why do they come hang with him?
Because he lives in a giant... What kind of question is that? He lives in a giant peach pit.
He doesn't have a Nintendo in there.
During the parade, where all the bugs and James are being welcomed to the city, like conquering heroes because they are big bugs, all the kids come and eat the peach. And James is like, yeah, come eat my peach. I've never had any friends, and you kids can eat as much of this peach as you want. And so I think all the kids are just like, yeah, this guy seems cool. He's got a big peach. He lives in Central Park.
Do they bring him food? Do they pay him to hang out with him?
Listen,
how's he going to get by?
All you had to do.
This is the part of the whimsy that I can't. Yeah.
Go and knock upon the door and The door would always be open to you, and you would always be asked to come inside and see the famous room where James had first met his friends, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, you would find the old green grasshopper in there as well, resting peacefully in a chair before the fire, or perhaps it would be the ladybug who had dropped in for a cup of tea and a gossip, or the centipede to show off a new batch of particularly elegant boots that he had just acquired. So you go to hang out with James, who, because the monoculture still existed, everybody knows about.
Oh, sure.
And maybe
yes.
you can see some of his cool bug friends.
Okay. I was gonna
now,
wonder.
I don't know if he has to go to public school or anything. I don't know any of that. But
I'm just saying, if I were a kid that found out that somebody had a peach that they lived in, 100% I would be going over there. I would definitely want to be seeing that for myself.
It'd be all over kid Twitter. That's for sure. That's true.
Twitter.
And then I did forget that at the end of the book, it's like, oh, and then he wrote a book about it, which is what you read.
Right.
So my headcanon where James just lives in his peach for the rest of his life and turns into the weird old peach man probably isn't true, because he did probably make money on this book, and I guess maybe paid to go to college or get a real house or like something.
I guess like this peach just doesn't rot. It just stays
it's just
all
a
right.
pit. It's just the pit, right?
It's just
right,
the
'cause
pit that
everybody
he lives
eats
in.
it.
Because
Yeah,
the kids ate all the peach, and it was described in very gross language. By the time the procession was over, the whole gigantic fruit had been completely eaten up, and only the big brown stone in the middle, licked clean and shiny by 10,000 eager little tongues, was left standing on the truck.
Oh God, I had I think purposely tried to forget that and succeeded. So thanks for ruining that.
The little kids come in, they eat the peach, and they lick it clean like that. That's a cool sound effect for your audiobook. And then he just lives in the peach pit.
I'm pretty sure that was in the audiobook.
Wasn't this peach pierced by the Empire State Building? That it probably had a bunch of pigeon poop on it and stuff?
I don't know, man.
Who washed
Are there
that
pigeons
peach?
that high up? Do pigeons chill at the top of the Empire State Building?
If I were a pigeon, I would.
The poshest pigeons.
Are pretty lazy.
The pigeons in the penthouse.
Well, you're right. There's probably if there was a big peach up there, they would. There's probably not a lot of like litter up there for them to eat. So they probably don't go up there very often.
And then they
talk about
building
the
fires in the
pigeons.
Fireplace inside the peach pit. That just seems real dangerous.
It does seem very dangerous. I don't know.
Is a peach pit wood? Like, what's it made out of? How would you refer to that material?
Isn't there cyanide in peach pits?
Whoa!
Yeah,
the story
I'm
took
pretty
a turn. I don't.
Peach pit
Uh-oh.
cyanide.
It's still probably
James
gonna
slowly goes mad from exposure to
It's
cyanide.
not a rock. Like it's gonna biodegrade at some point, I would think. Give it a few
houses
years.
are made of wood.
That's
So
a
if
good point.
it's woodish, wood-like.
Wood-esque.
Not sure. I'm not finding. 100 grams of moist peach seed contains 88 milligrams of cyanide.
Whoa.
If you ate 100 grams of peach seed, it could be dangerous. So it's probably not enough to do anything to James.
Like
But I'm not a scientist. This is what Quora says, so take it with a grain of salt, I suppose.
So as we wrap up thinking about James and his cyanide peach, any other thoughts about the book and like why it's like a big thing that resonated or people still think about?
I mean, he just goes so far. He goes so much farther than most authors who write chapter books for like mid-aged kids. This sort of like wild story ending is the kind of thing that you find at the end of a very short, funny story that's clearly meant for like a much younger audience. And it's a weird mix to have like, oh, I'm going to straight up kill these aunts and I'm going to have this kid getting beaten and then be like, but at the end, he's got jolly bug friends.
And they all have good jobs.
Right? It's just, it's a strange mix of like wonderfully imaginative and optimistic and also very like mean-spirited at times.
Yeah.
In a way that feels very like appropriate to how kids can be also.
Yeah, there was
I think that as maybe an early chapter book, like a lot of the chapters in this book are a page long.
True,
like
true.
It is very much kind of a starter chapter book. I think this might be the sort of book that you'd be more likely to like read to a kid or something a little bit at a time. So you got to do what a lot of great children's entertainment does and like leave something in for the grown-ups who are going to have to experience this 300 times.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's an article where I found a little bit on like some of the parts of Dahl that people are not huge fans of, and it's called The Dark Side of Roald Dahl. It's a BBC article from, I think, 2016. But it gets into like it being kind of his work for kids being kind of provocative and, as you said, like nasty and in ways that kids can just be. It closes with a quote from Maurice Sendak that says, "In plain terms, a child is a complicated creature who can drive you crazy. There's a cruelty to childhood. There's an anger." And some of that is just like lashing out at the world around you, not knowing what to do about things that are outside of your control, which I think this book kind of does some wish fulfillment in that, like, James is a good kid. He does not have to hurt anybody. He just wants to help his bug friends. But like the mean people get nasty comeuppance, and the most important person in the world is this cool kid who rode a peach through the sky. And like they beat up some cloud people, and all the cops love them. But you're right, it's like really outlandish, and you know, who knows what could happen next, which is like very irreverent. It's not like a polite story in any way. It doesn't take itself too seriously. Yeah,
I think wish fulfillment for sure is a big factor. Yeah.
And it doesn't adhere to like a strict adventure narrative. It's not like James is learning about himself necessarily. He's just like,
yeah, that's true. It's not like a coming of age story really at all. And it's interesting, like, you know, Andrew was talking about the Great Glass Elevator, and I feel about sequels to like classics the same way that oftentimes sequels are just wish fulfillment. Oh, I would love it if we got to do this wacky thing. And so they just go ahead. They're like, it's the second one, whatever, do what you want. And so that's why I think as a kid, I loved sequels so much because they just were so bananas. But as an adult, you're just like, oh God, what are you doing? This is so insane.
Well, because sequels can incorporate elements of the like fan response to a thing in a way that the originals can't. So
I loved Grease too, way more than the first Grease as a kid. I'm just saying.
I don't think that's a popularly held opinion about Grease too.
Everybody listening, chime in and prove them wrong, because I know you're out there. I know somebody out there heard that and was like, yes. But also there was a very cute boy in Grease too, and there really weren't any in the first one, so that might also have been a factor.
Grease 2 fans, hit us up at overduepod@gmail.com if you want to tell us about the movie Grease 2. Or hit us up on social at twitter.com/overduepod, facebook.com/overduepod. Andrew, what's the website? Tell me about it. Help me.
OverduePodcast.com has links to Apple Podcasts and Google Play and our RSS feed. We're also on Spotify and Stitcher and other places. If you go to patreon.com/overduepod, you can give us a little bit of money, get bonus episodes early, sit in on recordings of those when you're available, which is always a fun time, and get episodes of our long-form Epic Journey podcasts. Right now it's Hellboys. We're going through the Divine Comedy.
It's a good time. It's so funny.
And it's fun. Yeah.
Okay. I have been listening to that, and I had no idea how absurd it is. I really didn't. I've always like my understanding has been it's great literature. And then it straight up starts off as like, I'm the best writer and I'm hanging out with the other best writers. And I was like, are we for real? Oh my God.
I'm hanging out with all my best pals and we're all crying into our butts. Great. It's just the foundation of the Western canon, this thing. So if that sounds fun, patreon.com/overduepod. I think that's it.
Natasha, where should folks find the Unspoiled Show?
You can find us at unspoiledpodcast.com, facebook.com/unspoiledpod, Twitter at Unspoiled Show. We have about, I think, almost 30 shows now, not counting patrons-only shows. And one of the patrons-only things I'm doing right now is covering Twilight. We started off in good faith, We are now in eclipse. Good faith has started to wane. I'm doing it with a friend, Miles, who has a history of being like the grumpy old man, and he has really started to turn over a new leaf and try and understand the attitudes that he's had towards things, and really faced up to the fact that there's a lot of sexism in the like hatred of Twilight and its fandom.
Oh,
but,
sure.
Once you get reading it, there's also just some legitimate hatred of Twilight and all it represents. So that's a fun one. And Dresden Files is like one of my personal favorites that I'm covering for the free main feed. I'm also doing Doctor Who, but like, as I have trouble with whimsy here, y'all can probably guess how that's going. So
my issue with Doctor Who is I'm not sure where to start with it, and I'm sure Twitter knows and would recommend some stuff. But
yeah, we started with the Ninth Doctor because that's what everybody recommended. So that's the reboot, basically.
Like, I feel like I can only have one like 50-year-old sci-fi franchise in my head at one time. So
yeah,
when you got that new Picard
Star
coming,
Trek.
So
that new Picard. I'm amped up for it.
Andrew, get us out of here.
Okay, bye everyone. Try to be happy.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.